In this video, I'm going to take on the might of Photoshop's AI in a head-to-head editing contest using a photo I took at Mercedes World. One of these was created with AI, the other by myself. So let's see if a human can outperform the unbelievable Nano Banana Pro within Photoshop. Let's begin with AI to see just what it's capable of. We'll select the whole image with Control A, which we can see with the marching ants. Then let's head up to Edit, Generative Fill, and choose Nano Banana Pro. In the prompt, type something like, place this car on a racetrack going at speed, keep the car in the same position, the day should be a bright sunny day at noon, and generate. After 36 seconds, I timed it, Nano Banana Pro spews out this image, which is pretty darn good. Everything is correct, the car itself, the location, the colors for the time of day, and the shadow on the floor. I mean, it's even traveling at speed with that rolling car motion effect. However, if you look closely, it's not actually the car I photographed. It's slightly misshaped, and the quality, if you zoom in, is quite poor, and the shine is now a dull matte finish. I mean, you could probably use this image for posting on social media or thumbnails, but nothing much else. Still, amazing work for 36 seconds. Now let's try this the old-fashioned way. So I took two images at Mercedes World, one of the car in the showroom, the other from exactly the same height using the same 24mm camera on the iPhone, taking into account the angle of the car to the angle of the road. Here's the result. So in Photoshop, I'll head up to Select and Subject. And it does an amazing job at finding the main focus of the image, the car. Now I'm going to copy this selection with Control C, head over to the image of the road and paste with Control V to composite these two images, repositioning the car to where looks most realistic, depending on size and angle. And you can see zooming in, the selection is just incredible. Older versions of Photoshop, you would have had to manually cut out this selection using the pen tool, not these days. However, there is one glaringly obvious problem. There is no shadow under the car. Let's head back to the original image from the showroom, and we're going to use this real shadow, which was luckily created by sunlight blasting through the windows. Using the pen tool, I'll create a rough path of the shadow. Doesn't need to be perfect, and closing the path can go directly underneath the car for reasons which will become obvious in a second. Make a selection with a 1 pixel radius. Save this selection, but not to this document, to the composite document we're creating next door. Call this something like shadow. Jump back over to the other document and create a fresh new layer. Now we can load up that new selection we just created. And there it is. Now what we need to do is fill it with black. Head up to Edit and Fill. Choose black from the drop-down menu. Now we have an exact replica of the actual shadow. We just need to drag it below the car layer and using the Move tool, position it into place. Now we should put these two layers into its own group using Control G and rename it Car and Shadow. And that's looking pretty awesome already. Still needs a bit of work though. Let's open up that shadow layer and just reduce down the opacity a touch to 92%, because a shadow wouldn't be completely black in real life. Also, the strength of the shadow would decrease the further away from its origin. So let's create a simple mask layer and using a black brush tool, reduce the opacity by 50%. Now we can feather the front edge of that shadow. Also, shadows wouldn't be 100% sharp. So by right-clicking, we can convert this layer into a smart object for use with filters. Now we can choose one of the blur filters, being Gaussian blur, and we'll reduce down a fraction to 8.5 pixels. And that shadow is now looking very realistic, if I do say so myself. Now for some color and contrast adjustments on the car. So placing above the car layer, I'm going to add a selective color adjustment. Also, I'm going to clip the adjustment to just the car layer, not the entire composited image. Now the car looks a little yellowy to my eye. So using the yellow channel, opposite of yellow is blue on the color wheel, and that looks a bit more coherent. Also, if you look at the front of the car, there are some random cyan colors, which we can also reduce down using that cyan slider. Lastly, on the white channel, let's just try to match the color temperature of the rest of the background image. Around 10% blue should do it. And that's looking much better. I'm also going to give the car a curves adjustment. Once again, clipping it to the car layer and performing a subtle S-curve for added contrast. Here's a before and after. Looks nice. And we're done for now with the car and shadow group. Now it's time to create some speed. We want this car going like a bat out of hell down this pit lane. Now, the whole reason I'm creating this image in the first place is because it would be very rare to see a museum grade car like this ever on a racing track, let alone on a public highway. So for this, we need to transform the background layer into a smart object. Now we can fully utilize one of those filters, which is going to be path blur. Now you can see by default, the background layer now has a left to right motion blur effect. For now, we're going to turn off the speed effect and concentrate on the direction of travel. So we're going to place these control points along the same path of the actual road where the converging lines meet. And using definite objects to use in the scene will help you find where to place these control points. Now watch this. If we increase the speed effect, we now get incredible motion blur along those lines that we created. And that's how path blur works. The only slight problem is that in real life, motion blur is not linear. Far away objects would be moving much less than objects closer to the camera. That's what's called the parallax effect. How we can overcome this problem is if we click one of these endpoints and reduce the endpoint speed down to nothing, you can see the opposite endpoint retains all of the speed while the distant point stays static. Repeating this process for all of the endpoints results in a much more realistic motion blur effect, faster towards the front of the image. And the beauty of changing this background layer originally into a smart object allows us to go back in and change that blur speed if we so desire. I think 125% looks about right. Now you've probably seen another glaring problem with this composite, is that the wheel is not spinning, which it would be on a speeding rolling car effect. No problem. If we head into the car layer inside the group, we can change that layer yet again into a smart object. This time we can add a different kind of blur, which is a spin effect. Position it and resize the control points to cover that front wheel. And the blur angle of about 15% works perfectly for this effect. Here's a before and after. Now the rear wheel I'm not going to bother with because I'll be blurring the entire back end of the car in just a few minutes. Now zooming in on this windscreen, we can see some remnants of the showroom in the reflections and a random person through the rear window, which we need to address. What we're going to do is create a mask on the car layer and using the pen tool, draw a path around that rear window. With a black brush, we can now reveal the motion blur from the background layer underneath. Although it does look a little dark for my taste, so just above the background layer, we can create a curve adjustment, drag up the exposure, which of course is affecting the whole picture. So we can invert the mask with Control I, and then using a white brush, bring back the brighter part of the background. Now to finish off the reflections on the windscreen and the side window, I'm going to create a fresh new layer to make some selections using the pen tool. Now using a portion of the sky as a sample, let's grab the clone tool and paint in a reflection of the sky. Reduce the opacity to around 50%. Choosing a blending option of something like hard light, perhaps a reduction in opacity. Now we have much more realistic reflections. So now for a touch of color grading. Stamping down all of the layers into one with Control, Alt, Shift and E. We can convert this layer into a smart object and head into Camera Raw filter. Now, for those of you who don't know, Camera Raw is essentially Lightroom embedded directly into Photoshop. We can perform things like an object mask to add a touch of clarity. The road here, I think, needs some enhancement to bring out that rolling car effect. So using a brush mask, I'll roughly select the road and bump up the clarity slider to around 50% and also dehaze by a small amount. So colors, we need to sort out this red streak across the roof of the car and also match some of the blues and aquas. Using saturation, we can remove those reds altogether. On the hue sliders, I'm going to add a touch of cyans into the blue sky to match the windows of the Mercedes World building, and equally try to do the same with the aquas to introduce more blue. Now onto luminance. We can bring up those blues a hair. The greens and yellows of the foliage in the far distance would benefit from a bump in luminance, and actually the hue shift on those greens to a more autumnal color. And let's commit those changes. So back in Photoshop, the rear end of the car has been bugging me because it wouldn't be this sharp in real life. Let's stamp down the layer with Control, Alt, Shift and E. So once again, you've guessed it, convert into a smart object, choose Gaussian blur with a pixel blur of around 10, create an inverted mask, and using a white brush, introduce some blur to soften the rear end, including that rear wheel we spoke about earlier. And once again, because we made this a smart object, we can tweak the strength should you so desire. And the cherry on the top is adding a lens flare effect. Here's a stock starburst overlay. We'll copy this and Control V to paste into my composite. Roughly position it and change the blending option to screen, which ignores the blacks, keeping the sunburst portion of the image. And finally, position in the top corner of the windscreen. Taking a snapshot from inside a museum showroom, we can composite and transform this image into a dynamic rolling car shot. I believe I've been able to achieve a cleaner, higher resolution image with, not to mention, way better reflections than that dull matte finish produced by Nano Banana Pro. Yes, it took much longer to do, but at least it's mostly a real image. Or should I say, two real images composited together the old-fashioned way. Anyway, if you're interested in headshot photography and would like to improve your portrait skills, I have a comprehensive headshot photography course where you can learn about gear, working with models, lighting setups, the business side of things, and of course, editing and professional retouching lessons. There are over 50 chapters and 5 hours of content, so well worth a look. I also have a Lightroom preset pack. I'll pop all of those links in the description below. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. Please give us a thumbs up if you did, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more photography content. I'll see you on the flip side.